from the beginning. Let's see. I'm hoping this won't be just me talking to PowerPoint slides because that'd be really dull. Screen, and then
good. Oh, yeah. Okay, there we go. Perfect.
Is that going to work? Yeah. Does that look okay?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. Thank you.
It's great. Okay, so yeah, thanks very much for joining, everybody. So to give you some context, my name's Tim Storer. I'm a lecturer at the University of Glasgow, where my interests are in software engineering. So I do a lot of my teaching around collaborative software engineering practices, quality assurance, that kind of thing. And so I lead our team project program, for example, where we get groups of students to work on real world software engineering projects. So in some respects, I'm a little bit different from most of my colleagues in the School of Computing Science at Glasgow, who think of themselves as computer scientists. I think of myself as a software engineering researcher and educator. So I'm less interested in the fundamentals of computing theory and developing new programming languages, that kind of thing. Done a little bit of that, but I'm more interested in building tools for real human beings who have to create software. So I'm interested in understanding how software engineers really work and building tools to make their lives better. And a lot of my teaching is also around that. So how do I make the practice of software engineering real to students who've often never had to deploy code to real users before? So that's my background. And then just to mention one other thing, another initiative that we run at Glasgow, which might be of interest to some of your students, is when they're thinking about which university to apply for, we run something called the Glasgow University Software Service, where we employ students on paid software development projects across the university, where they're supporting typically research projects, but also business units within the university wanting to do particular software development capability. So we've had about, over 5 years, we've had about 100 and 120, 130 students go through so far, working for us on those real world projects. And it's a really good way to give them experience of working with real customers. So in this talk, what I thought I would do, and apologies if this feels, I wasn't quite sure how to pitch this, so I didn't intend to deliver a talk that teaches your grandmother to suck eggs, as it were. So if you apologies if you find that the title patronizing and you're fully familiar with GitHub, this talk may not be for you. But one of the key pieces of advice I often give to both our own students, but also to high school students when they're visiting on open days or other activities, is to get involved on GitHub. And many of them seem quite surprised by that piece of advice, and so I thought I'd give hopefully a fairly short and practical talk about what I mean by getting involved with GitHub and how to go about getting started doing that. So I'll talk a little bit about what is Git and what is GitHub, how you go about creating an account using GitHub. Well, sorry, I'll skip that, but I'll look at how you use GitHub to publish your CV as a way of promoting your profile on GitHub, and I'll also talk about how you can get involved in contributing to open source repositories and why you might want to do that, why that might be a good thing to do. So what is Git? So Git is a version control or source control system that was originally developed for the Linux kernel, I think in the late 1990s or early 2000s. So source control is a means by which software engineers track the version history of every single change made to a source control, to an application code base. And originally, version control tools were built for program source code. That was the original use case, but you can actually use them for just about any artifact where you want to track changes to that artifact over time, and not just track the fact that a change has been made, but also who made that change, when they made that change, and the reasons for that change. It also provides capabilities for concurrent development to source code bases. So if two different engineers are working on two different branches, two different parallel feature changes to a software application, that can be done concurrently, and version control tools like Git provide you with facilities for merging those changes into the mainline development of a code base in a way that doesn't cause overwrites or conflicts. So there's a really nice book from the early 90s that talks about the development of the Windows NT code base. And one of the chapters covers their source control processes, and it involves queues of software engineers queuing up at the source control office with the floppy disk containing their changes. And they would bring this floppy disk in, and the master control source control change director would take the disk off them, insert it into into a computer to run all sorts of tests on it, discover that all of those changes were actually out of date compared to previous changes that had been applied, take the disk out, throw it back at the developer who'd had the temerity to bring this old code with them, and make them go to the back of the line with updated changes. And so source control tools like Git were introduced to try to overcome this problem of concurrent development in large code bases. There are also alternatives available, but Git is these days by far the most popular. It's pretty much the de facto standard in industry. So previously there were tools like Subversion, Mercurial, really nice niche tools like Fossil, but these have never really gained the same traction that Git had with the software engineering ecosystem. So then there's the question is, well, what is GitHub? So GitHub is at its core is essentially a web application for hosting Git repositories, of source code. And it's probably the biggest, well, it's certainly the biggest open source repository hosting platform in the world. I checked recently, I think it has about 500 million repositories, of which about 40 million are public, about 10% are public and available for review. So at its core, it's a web application for hosting these repositories to allow people to share code, share source code repositories between users. But it's more than that. It's also an online community of open source contributors. So you can think of GitHub as, yes, at its essential core, it's a web application that allows you to put your code online and to share that code with others and have them offer changes to that code. But it's also a community of developers, very much like a social network, for which almost everybody who's a software developer or software engineer will have an account. So you can think of it as a social network, a professional social network, the equivalent of LinkedIn, but for software engineers. Okay. So, and you can see here, there's my very unpopular profile there that I have with my research software hosted on my repositories. So I'm by no means a leading contributor to GitHub, and I've never claimed to be. You can also see there's Scratch, which some of you may have come across, for teaching very early stage computer science concepts. Quite a nice ecosystem in there. So what I thought I would do as a next step is talk about how you use GitHub to host an online version of your CV. And there's several reasons for doing this. The first reason is that it's a good place for you to maintain, just like any CV, it's a good place for you to maintain a list of your skills and your experiences, your education, and so on, in an up-to-date online and accessible setting so that people can access it. But just as importantly for you or potentially your pupils, who can also create GitHub accounts as long as they meet GitHub's requirements, which is, I think they have to be 13 years or older, it's a good way of maintaining an online personal portfolio. And that can be a mix of personal projects that you as a software engineer or a student have been working on to enhance and grow your own skills. But it can also be references to the open source projects that you have contributed to as an aspiring software professional. And so as a way of demonstrating your skills and abilities and your interest and appetite for technology. So I spent probably 20 years as an academic in one guise or another now, and spent a lot of my time talking to industry and talking to recruiters. And as you can imagine, many recruiters of graduates or graduate apprentices are not looking necessarily for significant experience from the people they recruit. What they're looking for is evidence that the person who is sitting in front of them for an interview has some appetite and enthusiasm for the profession, and an ability and an aptitude to learn new principles, new concepts, and new technologies. And so having a GitHub profile that combines those things in an online CV is a really good way of showcasing and signaling to potential recruiters your capabilities and your enthusiasm. So I actually pinched these are some extracts from one of my students from my student CVs who I was kind enough to let me share them with you as kind of just an indicator of how you can highlight your yes, your skills and your experience, but also the projects that you've undertaken on in a personal capacity. So let's drop out of PowerPoint for now. Let's actually let's go and have a look at how we do this practically. So the first thing I need to do once I've created my account, which is I'm not going to bother covering because it's like creating an account on Facebook or wherever you. So I'm sure it's not needed. But I'm going to talk about how I create an example of a CV online. And I've got some notes here as well to help guide me, so hopefully this won't get too far off track. So first thing I need to do is create a repository, so for my CV to be stored in. And so I'm going to click on New here for a new repository, and I'm going to give it a name. And if you want that repository to be linked directly to your profile, you'll need to call it the name of give the repository a name of your user account ID. There's mine, TWS SWT, which is my initials forwards backwards. I couldn't get TWS by the time I signed up. TWS SWT.github.io if I wanted it to be my profile CV. I'm not going to do that today because I want to just do an example CV. So I'm going to do example CV-2. Okay. I'm going to say, call this Tim Storer's CV. Description. I want to make it public because I want to be able to show it to the world and share it with people and share it with potential recruiters, and I want people to be able to browse it. And then I'll click create repository and I'm underway. Okay. So the next thing I need to do is, if I want to create a CV inside this repository, I need a file to do it in. So we can see here, GitHub has told me it's created for me a empty repository site. So now I can create my first file. So I'm going to do that by clicking on creating a new file. And I need to put some initial content into it. So let's see, what can we say? I can say, give it a title. And this file I'm going to create is in Markdown format. So Markdown is a way of giving syntax highlighting directions to GitHub to tell it how to roughly present my content for me. So if I want to present a top level header, I can put a hash at the front of at the start of the line, and then I can type the title. So I'll say Tim Storer's CV. And then maybe I want to give often for a sort of 1 or 2 page industrial profile CV, I want a short, snappy couple of sentences that profile me, that highlight my aptitude and ability. So I might say, I am a lazy, good for nothing academic who enjoys pretending to participate in thought leadership whilst enjoying endless cups of coffee. Endless cups of coffee hidden in my office with my door closed and set to do not disturb. And I want to make it sound, maybe I want to put the word aspirational in here as well. And aspirational, because I haven't really achieved this yet. I'm not yet a professor, so let's say aspirational, lazy, good for nothing. There we go. Okay, so I've now got the first part of my CV written. So what I can do now is I can save this. I can make as many edits to it as I want because I'm going to be making what I call commits to the repository, and every commit contains the changes to this repository for me. So let's so I need to give the file a name, and by default, just like for web application pages, the root page in a path is, you can call index, but because this is a markdown file, I'm going to call it index.md. I can do a quick preview just to show me what it looks like, what it's going to look like. And there's the GitHub formatting the markdown for me with my name and my kind of introductory paragraph about myself. So let's go back to edit, and then I'll commit the changes. And good practice, I should really add a description beyond what the header for the commit is. So I'm giving the rationale for my commit added. So maybe added the overview profile paragraph to CV, and commit changes. Okay, so now I've created the first version of my CV. The next thing for me to do is make sure that it's published so that the world can see me and see my profile. So to do that, I go to settings, and then I go down to this pages setting here. Okay. And I've got various options for how I actually do the deployment, but I'm just going to say deploy from branch for now. There's other techniques for you doing this. You can say GitHub Actions and so on, but that's more advanced stuff, so we'll not do that. And we need to choose the branch which we're going to publish from. So remember I said that the branches were a way of managing concurrent development, and several people are working on slightly different versions of the software at the same time. So there's always one default branch, if you like, the master branch or main branch. And GitHub by default calls it the main branch, and that's the version of my CV that I want to get published. And I might in the future want to experiment with, say, adding my educational experience, or education or my experience to my CV. So I might create branches for that whilst I experiment with how I want that to look, and then I can publish that I can merge that with the main branch when I'm ready for it to be published for the world to see. Okay, so I'm going to click save. Okay, and now GitHub tells me that your site is currently being built from the main branch, and I can go and have a look at it in a second. So I'm just going to refresh this page. Hopefully it'll be built in a second or two. Let's see if it's going to be built. It usually takes a few seconds just to get going. Give it a second. Yeah, there we go. No, still going. Okay, so whilst that's still going, I'll come back and have a look at that in a second. But what I might want to do is also add a theme to the page. Let's give it one more go. It's going to, no, it's still being built. Okay, so I'm going to come back to my editor over here in code, and oh, wrong one. Where have I gone? This one here, isn't it? Ooh. Share again. Too many buttons in the way.
I think you've managed to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, I'm just coming back onto it, don't worry. There we go. Okay, so come back to here. I'll just give this one more refresh to see if it's going to let me show. No, it's being awkward. Oh, there it is. My site is now live at example CVT, so we can go and have a look at it. And okay, so I've now published a first version of my CV. So that's great. It doesn't look very nice though. So what we can do to make it look a bit prettier is we can add a theme to it. GitHub provides us with a number of standard themes that we can customize. So I'm going to go back to the editor for my repository, and I'm going to add a new file to my repository, and we're going to call it _config.yml. And I'm going to add in here, you look, GitHub being a very nice tool, tells me exactly how to do this. So I'll just duplicate this branch, duplicate this page, go and have a look at the settings, pages, where I was before, and it is actually telling me back here that I can add a Jekyll theme, which is the sort of the stylings to this page. It tells me how to do that. So I need to make this config YML file, and then I'm going to add a theme to it. And there's lots of different themes you can add, but you can add a theme called Jekyll Minimal. I'm going to do that by just modifying this config file to say, please apply this Jekyll theme to my CV. So I'm going to I'll do that in this config YML file I've just created here. So I'm going to click commit changes, makes CV appear in minimal styling. So my commit messages aren't really that great because I should really be explaining why I've chosen that styling here, but just for rather than saying what I've done, because I can see that in the changes, but just for quickness, let's just do that commit. And then if we go back to pages and go back to where I published a second. Yeah, so it'll take a minute or two to update. So we'll leave that and come back to it in a second to see what impact that's had. Just try refreshing again. No. So just while that's rebuilding, we'll go back and make some further edits. I'm going to have a look at that again in a second. So each time I make a change, GitHub will pick up the change that's been made as a result of the commit, and it will rebuild my CV, the published version of my CV for me, but that might take 30 seconds or so just to update. Let's give it one more go. There we go. So we can see here now that that styling has now been applied to the page, and we can see that we've got a sort of nice layout here where the main content is over on the right, and we've got some sort of tab structure on the left with this ordered list with the contributor of the theme reported down here, and also links to where the project's edited on GitHub and so on. I can also add images into my CV if I want to. So let's go back now and add some more content. So I'm going to go back to that index file again that I had and start editing it by clicking on this edit this file button. And let's say I want to put my profile picture in here. So if I go to my home page, GitHub again, and I'm going to open the image. Ooh. Give me the image. So copy image address. Okay. So Markdown is a way of, as I say, of generating HTML, but using a simpler syntax. So there are rules for creating images in GitHub. So one way I can create an image inside this Markdown format is by just putting a URL to the image into the file like this, with this exclamation font and then some square brackets and then an open parentheses, the URL, close parentheses, and that'll embed an image if I want one. However, problem with that is that I can't scale the image, which is a bit of a pain, because the image might be too big compared to how I really want it to look online. So what I can do instead is use a HTML tag, which you'll recognize, I'm sure, embedded directly within the Markdown, and specify a width for the image instead, like that. So let's click preview just to see what those two images will look like. So you can see here that yeah, there's the original image, and there's the image that I actually want to keep. So if I go back from preview to edit, I'll just remove that one there. And then I can add some more content. So what are recruiters interested in? Well, they want to hear about my education. They might want to hear about my work experience. They might want to hear about my projects that I've worked on, and they might want to hear about my open source contributions. Okay. Okay, and then I can create a list perhaps of my projects. So let's say, I don't know, there's the theatre project that I work on, and I can make that as a link. And in fact, I'm going to make this a second level header, and then I'm going to put a link in here. And so a link is square brackets, and then the text I want in the link, and then a link to that project there. So actually keep this project on GitHub rather than GitLab. SDSM. So there's one of the projects that I maintain along with my former PhD student, Tom. So I can put that in there, and I'll go back and maybe just get a bit of text about theatre from the README file. And there it is. Okay. Go back to my editor, paste that in. Okay. Some more text in there. Okay, so I can continue to make changes to my CV, reference those important things about me that, what's my professional experience, what are my technical skills, I should probably put that in here as well. To make me, highlight my career track record as best as possible for the potential that I have to make a contribution to a new organization. Technical skills, coffee drinking, feet up, feet horizontal, or legs horizontal, horizontal legs, thought leadership. There we go. So let's do that. Commit changes, just as we did before. And again, we'll do another update to that. That's categories to CV. Okay, so that's now the updated version of that markdown file with my first of my projects listed. I've started to talk about my technical skills, my open source contributions, and I've also given you an indication of what I actually look like. And I might want to go back at some point and change the theme to be something more sophisticated as well, perhaps alter the layout by using one of the, maybe a CV specific theme and so on. But the nice thing about Markdown is that it encourages you to focus more on the content that you want to present and less on the layout. You let the theme take care of the layout for you. So let's go back and have a look at what that looks like over here now. So there we go. It's updated a little bit quicker this time. So we're starting to see my CV come together here. And I was working on an earlier example over here. That one's not quite right. There we go. Working on an earlier example over here, where I've started to list more of the projects that I've worked on and my work experience and so on. Probably a slightly too long text there, motivating you as to why you'd want to speak to me as a recruiter. Okay. So I can now share this. This is now published online. Anyone can go and access it if they want to. And I can also put it into, I can embed it into emails, I can embed it into UCAS applications or graduate apprenticeship applications, so that recruiters and universities and so on can see that I'm a enthusiastic and keen member of the tech community. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, or sort of the final sort of third of this this little this presentation, was looking at making contributions to GitHub. So I don't have time to sort of go into this in too much detail, but what I thought I'd do is just talk through how you get involved in contributing to GitHub projects and why you'd want to do it. And as I said earlier on in the talk, being able to show that you are contributing to real projects that other people care about is a great way of demonstrating your enthusiasm for technology, and it's something that recruiters really do look for. So you can see here that there are rankings of how many contributions developers have made to different projects, and it isn't necessary to get up to the even into the tens or hundreds for a relatively new developer to be able to highlight themselves as somebody who has real potential to make a difference in the tech industry, and somebody who's a good strong candidate for a undergraduate admission or or work experience. But GitHub allows you to demonstrate your participation in open source projects. So there's a number of ways in which you can find opportunities for contributing to open source projects. But the most important thing to bear in mind is that there are far more open source projects looking for contributors who are enthusiastic and keen to learn than there are enthusiastic and keen to learn contributors. So you're actually in a very strong position to join an open source community, because open source software projects know that they have to work hard to, first of all, attract and then also retain contributors willing to make changes to open source projects. So one way you can find out about projects that are easy to access and easy to get started in, as well as being welcoming, is to look for lists of open source projects. So I've picked one here that I found a while ago, where someone is curating different projects that are welcoming to first-time contributors, and highlighted from a particular blog post series. But it identifies projects by different languages that you might want to contribute to. And so you can go and browse through those projects according to which languages you're familiar with or which languages you would like to become more familiar with, to find opportunities to make changes and offer new features or bug fix for those projects. The next thing you can do is, once you've found a project that you might want to contribute to, is search for relevant issues that you might be able to make a difference on as a relative newcomer to the project. And good open source projects will specifically identify good first issue. They're called good first issue tasks, by labeling them in the project's issue tracker as being good first issues. So you can see here, down here in this screenshot here, that this return in final can swallow exception is labeled for this particular project Scrapey, which is a web scraping framework written in Python, that this is a good first issue. And that means it's signaling that this is suitable for someone who's interested in joining the project but wants a low bar to entry to work on. Sometimes these are called starter issues, sometimes they're called help wanted issues, depending on the open source community. But that's a good way of finding an opportunity to make a difference in an open source project. Another way you can find opportunities to contribute is challenge repositories. So there are lots of different examples of these. This one here is called 100 Lines of Code, and it's a repository of code in lots of different languages that are short applications written in 100 lines of code or less, doing useful things, nevertheless useful, even though they're very small programs. And so people create issues in these repositories describing the kinds of small pieces of code they would like to see implemented in a particular language. So you can see here that somebody's looking for a Sudoku solver in Java as an issue that they're looking to get worked on. So challenge repositories like this, where the code base is relatively small and you've got quite a bit of freedom as to how you implement the code, can also be a good way of getting involved in the project. The next thing you should do is check the contributing guide. So again, good software projects or established software projects will have written quite an extensive amount of documentation describing the best ways to get involved in that project and the different ways you can get involved, whether that's submitting feature changes or submitting bug fixes, or it might just be about writing up some of the documentation for the project that might be missing, or improving the quality of the documentation, or providing additional tutorial examples for different aspects of the project. So there's lots of different ways you can contribute to a project, and not all of them have to involve actually writing program code. Often a good way to get started is helping to improve the quality of the test suite that the project has, or improving the quality of the documentation to help newcomers and users of the software to become better equipped with it. There is also usually additional social media infrastructure around the software project. For example, many open source communities have Slack communities where you can make suggestions or discuss possible new features or vote on new features or report bugs or get support help with, how do I do such and such with this particular framework. So those communities are genuinely quite open, welcoming, friendly, because they know they have to attract and retain new contributors, so they can't afford to be putting obstacles in people's way to contribution. You can also use there's a subreddit reported here for Scrapey and Stack Overflow as well, so they'll use different tools for different projects. But if you look at the contributing guide, it'll tell you not just how to make the technical change, but how to become involved in the community. So if you're going to make a source code change to the project, what you'll probably need to do is create a fork of that project, and that means making a copy of the project into your own code base, into your own account from that source Scrapey account. And you can see here in this example how to do that. All you need to do is go to the repository that you want to make a change to, click on the fork button, and it will take you through the process of making an exact copy, an exact clone of that repository into your own workspace, into your own account, that you can then make changes to as you're working on addressing the feature or change that you want to make. Once you've made those changes, the next step is to do what is called a pull request. And a pull request is very simply just a request to a maintainer of the parent repository to pull the changes from your local repository, the one that you created in your account, into that master repository. So you can see here that I'm about to, that I was looking at creating a merge request for Scrapey from the fork of Scrapey that I have in my personal workspace into the master parent Scrapey workspace over here. And there's lots of good practices associated with creating a pull request, but you can find out about those when you read that contributing guide for the project. They'll tell you what they're looking for, what information they'd like you to provide, what you should add in terms of potentially extra tests to cover your code that you're making changes to, any tests that you're removing, explanations as to why you've done things a certain way, and so on. So the communities will genuinely be very supportive of helping new contributors understand that process. Once you've created your pull request, you probably will need to engage in some discussions with the open source community, in particular the maintainers of the repository, asking you to make slight changes or making suggestions as to what you could do differently. So you can see here that this contributor Clanger is having some correspondence with this person, K Mike, about the Scrapey repository and going back and forth about how to make some modifications to some tests in the code base. And that's all part of that treating GitHub as not just as a platform for hosting code, but as a community of open source contributors. So eventually, with a bit of luck, you'll end up with a pull request being accepted by the contributors and getting merged into the code base. And so as well as giving yourself a pat on the back, you should also make sure that you add that contribution to that CV so that you're showing on your CV that you have made a contribution to an open source community, and you can actually link to concrete evidence of that in your resume, in your CV. And that, as again, for recruiters, that's gold dust, because it shows to a recruiter for a tech company that you both understand the workflow, the process of making those changes to open source software, but it also shows that you have an enthusiasm for doing so, and you're willing to put the effort into participating, not just in the technical aspects, but in the community of open source contributors. So that's a bit of a whirlwind tour of GitHub. Hope it's been useful. If people do have questions, I'm more than willing to take any questions from anyone who's in the audience. And thanks very much for listening.
That was really interesting. I've certainly learned quite a bit. I actually created my own first little README file. I've been experimenting with GitHub. I'm just for storing code, to be honest. But I've never created a README file and things. So some of the things you were saying there, I found really, really interesting. I think from a teacher's point of view, I think just as a tool, if pupils are able to access GitHub in local authorities, that idea of kind of creating that showcase of, your coding projects throughout your time in school, I think is a really exciting prospect, So here's my website work from second, third, and fourth year, and here's my Python coding and all that type of stuff. It is really nice. It's really interesting. So I found that really useful to find out, and I never created the CV thing before with the markdown, so I'm going to go and do that to put my 3 random projects uh, together. Together. Does anyone have any questions for Tim?
No, all ready to get home before it gets dark.
Yeah, I've never thought about using a CV or do something with my pupils. That's great. Thanks, Al. See how that gets on. I also think that it's going to be quite interesting. I don't know if any teachers have to use GitHub have done this, but I can imagine creating a project and asking the pupils to fork it to go and fix the errors
Yeah.
that are in that type of code. They'll kind of simulate that type of environment at a lower level, I suppose. So I know that one of my projects, for example, I know the responsive style sheet for mobile phone is rubbish, and that could be an issue that would need to be solved. I know that there's also a bit there's something that keeps appearing that shouldn't be appearing on the screen while you're running one of my queries, and it doesn't affect the functionality, but I can't figure out how to get that to disappear when so there's
Yeah.
I know that one of the projects that I've got, it has issues. It doesn't solve the functionality, but from a teaching point of view, I think, I could actually go and make, an HTML, CSS, and a JavaScript site. I ask pupils to fork it and then get them to identify the issues and solve them and things.
One thing I should say, just a couple of
Thank you,
comments
Mr.
there
Lee.
about about that sort of being a little bit intimidated by GitHub. I don't know if intimidated is perhaps quite the right word, but being a bit uncertain about it is one thing to bear in mind is GitHub is owned by Microsoft, so it's very much it's backed by a large corporate that has a really solid interest in maintaining its reputation for providing a safe place for software development activity to take place. So it's, I think that's something to emphasize around these collaboration tools. It's perhaps unfortunate that it's named Git and it, therefore sounds quite hostile. And I think that probably reflects the personality of Linus Torvalds more than anything. But, as a platform, open source communities generally know that they need to attract and retain contributors, so it matters to them to be a professional, friendly, welcoming place to invite people to participate in.
Indeed. Okay. If there are any more questions, in the chat.
No.
Well, that's great. Listen, Tim, I think that was really, really interesting. And I think that I'm certainly going to use more GitHub just for myself. And I think that some of the things that I would like to do is about creating little kind of apps and projects that might help pupils learn a bit more about computing. But again, from a teaching perspective, it'd be really interesting to know if any of you actually go ahead and do any of these things with your pupils. I'd be really interested to find that out. I'm
Yeah.
aware that some local authorities, there are issues with accessing Get through your firewall. But let's just see how we get on. Tim, I'll leave it there, and thanks for
Just
joining us today.
very quickly, if anybody does want to contact me or ask any further questions about the offline, you're more than welcome to. My email address is on the university website, so it's no problem contacting me if that's of interest. Please do.
Great. Okay, Tim, I will share this recording with our bigger computing community, and they can maybe take 40 minutes or so to have a look through it and see what they think. But I'll end the recording here and say my farewell.